Canadian couple Richard Paraseau and Brittany Burke were confronted by the police at a convenience store in Alberta, Canada, after trying to pay for items with a stolen credit card in late June of 2018. Surveillance footage from the Spruce Grove Ready Mart showed an officer struggling to control 29-year-old Burke, while Paraseau was pushing her towards the exit. Burke wound up pressed between them after the officer had grabbed hold of Paraseau's t-shirt. The latter eventually chose to push his girlfriend down with the cop in an attempt to flee, but his escape attempt was blocked when the man behind the counter intervened in the altercation. Paraseau, who lost his t-shirt in the struggle, ran to the back of the store and tried a different door, but found that it was locked. He returned to the store's main room and grabbed some bags of snacks, seemingly with the intent of throwing them at the cop. The latter drew his gun and Paraseau followed his orders and got flat down on the floor. He tried to make a run for it, but the officer tackled him near the exit, took his bag and began restraining him. In the confusion, Burke made her way to the back room and climbed a ladder into the ceiling panels. As she crawled through the space, the ceiling collapsed. The woman landed in the middle of the store and bounced off some shelves that appeared to have broken her fall. She got up quickly, but her drop coincided with the arrival of more officers and she surrendered. Burke was convicted of obstructing a peace officer, breaching conditions and mischief damage under $5,000. She was given a 15-day sentence in July, but credit for time served meant that she wouldn't go back behind bars. Paraseau was charged with similar crimes in addition to assaulting a police officer, possession of stolen property, using a stolen credit card and resisting arrest. A clip of the entire convenience store chase culminating with Burke's fall through the ceiling went viral and was viewed millions of times. Number 21. Justin Carter. On February the 15th of 2020, a masked robber entered a Raising Cane's Chicken Fingers franchise in Louisville, Kentucky, and held the worker behind the counter at gunpoint. 30-year-old Justin Carter, who was wearing a hoodie and a white mask that covered his entire face, demanded cash from the register. The only customers in the eatery at the time were a newlywed couple of police officers. Chase McKeon and his wife, Officer Nicole McKeon, were off duty and on a date night when the robbery occurred. Chase later told the media that he'd exchanged looks with his wife and they both knew what needed to be done, at which point their instincts took over. They both got up from their booth at the back of the restaurant and approached Carter with their pistols drawn. The latter dropped his weapon and sprinted out of the restaurant. The dynamic duo, as Chase and Nicole were nicknamed by the press, chased Carter for about a block and held him at gunpoint in a backyard until local law enforcement took him into custody. The face-tattooed perpetrator was charged with robbery, receiving stolen property, and possession of a handgun by a convicted felon. The McKeons' rapid response was lauded by a detective from the Louisville Metropolitan Police Department who believed that Carter's actions inside the restaurant would have escalated if not for their heroic intervention. Chase and Nicole had reportedly eaten at Raising Cane's on their wedding night 6 months prior. After they'd foiled the robbery, the company released a tweet thanking the couple, and since their date night had been cut short, announced that it will provide them with a year's worth of free food. Number 20. Eric Eugene Washington. In January of 2023, a masked man burst into the Ranchito for Taqueria in Houston and held patrons at gunpoint, demanding wallets and cash. The suspect, who was subsequently identified as 30-year-old Eric Eugene Washington, first collected money from customers seated at tables in the corners of the establishment, on the side with the exit. He then picked up the cash thrown in his direction by two people who'd taken shelter under a table. There were around 10 patrons in the Taqueria at the time. While the robbery was in progress, a 46-year-old man who was having dinner with a companion reached for his pistol. He bided his time until Washington was near his table with his back turned, as shown by surveillance footage. He then got up from his booth and shot him multiple times. He also fired into Washington's body while standing over him after he'd collapsed. Aside from an execution-style gunshot to the head, Washington suffered another 8 gunshot injuries. He died at the scene, and the gun he'd used was determined to have been a replica. The shooter, whom some later labeled a vigilante, retrieved what Washington had stolen and then told customers, "Come get your money." He then calmly took a sip on his beverage on his way out. as Washington was lying motionless on the floor. The man, reported as being white or Hispanic, entered a pickup truck with his companion and left the restaurant. He was tracked down by the authorities and was described as cooperative. He was neither arrested nor charged, and thus his identity wasn't disclosed, while legal implications of his actions were left to be determined by a grand jury. His lawyer described the experience as traumatic for him, adding, "Taking a human life is not something he does not take lightly and will burden him for the rest of his life." The legal representative argued that the killing had been justified under Texas law, but opinion on the matter was split. Some hailed the shooter as a hero, while others, including several Houston area activists, called for him to be arrested and condemned his actions of continuing to fire on Washington after he'd already been disabled by the first shots. Number 19. Cornell Neely. From April to early June of 2012, New York man Cornell Neely, aged 21, was involved in over a dozen bank heists in Manhattan, from Harlem to Battery Park, before his spree came to an end in the Bronx. Neely would typically slip a teller a note demanding cash in $50 and $100. He began his one-man crime wave with a robbery at the Midtown Sovereign Bank on April the 11th, from which he made off with around $2,320. He was most active in May, a month when he would become known as the Burberry Bandit. Neely had used the money he'd gotten earlier in the spree to buy designer clothes, which he was captured on surveillance wearing during subsequent heists. One of the items was a $250 Burberry shirt, which inspired the nickname that made national and international headlines. Neely was eventually arrested after 3 holdups he'd carried out in June. He made a total of $8,500 from his spree, but his spending choices would prove to be a bad decision. The man's flashy ways had not only attracted public attention to his case, but also made him easier to identify, as 12 witnesses picked him out of a lineup. Moreover, Neely had left his fingerprints at multiple crime scenes. He was given a sentence of 5 to 10 years in prison and was paroled in January of 2019. Within months, Neely returned to robbing banks. During the second length of his spree, he was connected to at least 10 attempted and successful heists in Midtown over a 2-week period in the summer of 2019. Neely was caught in July and jailed until December of that year, when he was released. Due to New York's bail reform laws, while awaiting trial, the Burberry Bandit continued robbing banks in the winter of 2020, amassing outstanding warrants from the NYPD and New York State Patrol. He was caught once again, and in 2021 pleaded guilty to a single bank robbery charge for a heist from which he made $7,600. During a hearing the following year, Neely apologized in court, expressing his regret towards the tellers he might have scared during his decade-long spree. He also argued that a lengthy sentence wouldn't rehabilitate him, pointing to the fact that he'd learned how to rob a bank in jail. A judge agreed with his court-appointed attorney that his actions had likely been the result of addiction and mental illness rather than maliciousness. He was sentenced to 26 months behind bars and 5 years of supervised release. Number 18. Joseph McInnes III and Tyree McCoy. 2 men carried out an armed robbery at a pub in Woodlawn, Maryland, on August 29th of 2017. Joseph McInnes III and Tyree McCoy, aged 21 and 22, went into the takeout area of Monahan's pub and held a worker at gunpoint. The robbery location would have likely been a bad decision on any given day, as the pub was a known hangout for off-duty cops. However, on that particular date, dozens of Baltimore County police officers had converged on the establishment to celebrate the retirement of Sergeant David Nerrell, who'd been with the force for 29 years. The worker, who'd been held at gunpoint, was aware of the heavy police presence and simply went into the part of the bar where they'd gathered and alerted them about the armed robbery. McInnes and McCoy fled on foot, but the officers soon caught up with them. They were arrested on charges that included armed robbery and possession of a handgun. A use of force investigation was also launched, as the officers had reportedly struck the 2 men before making the arrest. McInnes' injuries were visible in his booking photo, as he had multiple abrasions on his face and blood on his lips, while his left eye was swollen shut. Number 17. Taylor Smith. On August the 8th of 2018, teenager Jordan Holgerson and several of his friends were on a bridge at Moulton Falls Regional Park in Washington. One of Holgerson's companions had already taken the 50-foot plunge to the water below. A video which later went viral showed that the teenager herself had climbed over the wooden railing and was standing on the edge. Holgerson told the others that she was scared and appeared reluctant to jump, but her friend, 18-year-old Taylor Smith, was heard pressuring her off camera. She reminded Holgerson that she'd promised to do it and insisted she'd jump after her if anything happened. Smith grew increasingly frustrated and threatened to push the other team before giving her a countdown. Holgerson insisted that she wasn't ready. Footage showed the nervous teen telling a friend that she wasn't going to jump, but within moments, Smith pushed her. Holgerson's limbs flailed through the air and she landed in the water at an awkward angle from a height equivalent to that of the Hollywood sign. When she was pulled out, Holgerson was unable to breathe and could reportedly see her body change color by the second. She suffered broken ribs and a punctured lung in addition to leg injuries and spent 3 days in the hospital. Even after her physical health had begun to improve, Holgerson still struggled with anxiety and panic attacks. Smith was charged with misdemeanor reckless endangerment, to which she initially pleaded not guilty. The teenager changed her plea in March of 2019 after the prosecution offered her a deal in which she wouldn't serve any jail time. Smith apologized to Holgerson in court, claiming she'd always been in her thoughts since the incident. However, the victim's mother reported that the manner in which Smith had acted in the aftermath wasn't one exhibiting concern. She'd fled the scene after the push, hadn't visited Holgerson in the hospital, nor at her home while she was recovering. During sentencing, a judge deemed it necessary, given the ramifications of her actions, that she spent some time in jail. Smith was given a 2-day jail sentence along with 38 days on a county work crew and banned from contacting the victim for 2 years. She broke down in tears when a deputy handcuffed her and led her out of the courtroom. Number 16. Sinking Bride. A clip from a wedding in the US went viral in 2015 after the bride nearly died following an ill-advised stunt. The woman, whose identity wasn't revealed, was standing on the edge of a boat in her gown after her husband had jumped in the water while still wearing his suit. She seemed hesitant to follow him as a crowd of swimsuit-clad wedding guests encouraged her. The bride leapt from the boat, cheered on by her party, and broke through the water's surface. Within seconds, however, everyone in attendance would realize it had been a bad decision. The multi-layered dress enveloped the woman and she was unable to come up for air. A distraught guest shouted, "Find her!" off camera. The groom struggled to make his way to her through the floating material before 2 women and 2 members of the boat staff jumped in the water to help him. After nearly 30 seconds, the bride emerged and was visibly shaken but otherwise unharmed. Number 15. Adem Nikezic. In late January of 2023, New York man Adem Nikezic was brought into a courtroom in a wheelchair while wearing a hospital gown. The Staten Island resident had been involved in a car accident. 30-year-old Nikezic began crying uncontrollably when his lawyer revealed that his fiancée and their unborn daughter had died in the crash. He faced charges of manslaughter, criminally negligent homicide, vehicular assault, and drunk driving. According to the prosecution, early on January the 28th, Nikezic was intoxicated and driving a 2021 Dodge Challenger at high speed while weaving through traffic. His pregnant fiancée, 23-year-old Adriana Silmetage, was in the passenger seat. As they were traveling on Highland Boulevard in New Dorp, shortly before 5 a.m., Nikezic lost control of the Challenger and crashed into a wooden utility pole. The impact was devastating, as it cut the vehicle in pieces that were left mangled on the road. Silmetage was thrown 40 feet from the wreck and her severed leg was found about 20 feet from her body. Nikezic was taken to Staten Island University North Hospital after law enforcement noticed he was drunk. He initially told officers that another driver had cut him off. No one had informed the man that his fiancée and child had passed until after he'd been wheeled into the courtroom, at which point he broke down in tears. He was able to stand on his own during a subsequent appearance in early February, and as of the latest reports, his case was set to be presented to a grand jury. Nikezic had been arrested for DUI and driving with a suspended license in 2017, and repeated the latter offense in 2019 when he was also charged with resisting arrest. Number 14. Keith and Manuel. In the spring of 2012, a teenager walked into the Wilmer Police Department in Dallas County, Texas, and pointed his hands covered by a towel at a female communications officer. 18-year-old Keithan Manuel reportedly approached the window and told Patrice Huey to give him all the station house's money. The dispatcher initially laughed him off, believing it was some sort of prank. Manuel then changed his tune and claimed he was there to check if there were any tickets in his name. As the dispatcher was in the midst of a records check, he told her, "You know I have a gun, right?" That statement became a cause of concern for Huey, who called for backup. Manuel was arrested in the station at gunpoint and jailed. He subsequently maintained that he was making a joke, highlighting that he'd never claimed to have a gun. In a jailhouse interview, he told a media outlet, "I play like that all the time," and maintained that he didn't think Huey would take him seriously. His mother claimed that he suffered from mental health issues. Police Chief Victor Kemp also spoke to the press about the incident, claiming that he'd never expected to encounter one of the world's dumbest criminals in his own city. Regardless of how he'd meant the stunt to play out, if convicted of robbery, Manuel faced up to 20 years behind bars. Number 13. Kyle Stevens. At around 11 a.m. on January the 19th of 2019, law enforcement in Eureka, California, arrested homeless man Kyle Stevens for stealing a Ford pickup truck. The 20-year-old was processed and released within hours. At around 1:30 p.m., two officers from the department's Community Safety Enhancement Team were interacting with a group of homeless people near the intersection of 4th and D Street. Their marked black and white cruiser was stopped in the street, only a few feet away from them. Even though he'd already been arrested for auto theft, Stevens entered the cop car on the driver's side. He tried to put it in drive, but only managed to shift it in neutral. As he revved the engine, Officer Brian Ross reacted quickly and was able to drag Stevens out of the fully equipped police vehicle. While Ross and his partner were securing Stevens on the ground, the cruiser rolled over his leg, causing injuries that weren't deemed life-threatening. He was taken to a hospital where doctors also evaluated his mental health and then booked him at the Humboldt County Correctional Facility on a charge of felony auto theft. Number 12. Brianna Casillas. Colorado teenager Brianna Casillas robbed 6 Denver area banks and attempted to rob 2 more over in the spring of 2019. Casillas became known as the Glamour Bandit due to the flamboyant disguises she'd worn during the heists. They included scarves, sun hats, baseball caps, and sunglasses. In one of the robberies, she wore clear glasses and a choker, which, much like her other items of neckwear, was meant to disguise her easily identifiable neck tattoo. 19-year-old Casillas also carried a shoulder bag or a purse and had latex gloves on for each heist. 2 older model Honda Civic sedans, which had been stolen, were used in at least 4 of the robberies, but the teen's getaway driver wasn't identified. The attention-grabbing get-ups were one factor in Casillas' poor decision-making, along with her escalating the spree to targeting multiple banks in the same day. She'd started on March the 22nd with Vectra Bank on 3600 Quebec Street. A few more heists followed before, on April the 9th, she hit 3 banks and then another 2 on May the 8th, raising the total of her illicit gains to nearly $17,000. Casillas never spoke to tellers and usually handed them notes requesting $20, $50, or $100, but did use a gun to threaten the workers on one occasion. The police received several Crime Stoppers tips through which they identified Casillas as a suspect in late April. Officers apprehended her at an intersection in Aurora. In the past, she'd been arrested on suspicion of assault, obstructing a peace officer, resisting arrest, and theft. The charges associated with the spree included felony menacing, felony theft, 5 counts of robbery, 2 counts of criminal attempt to commit robbery, and tampering with physical evidence. Number 11. Zyama Johnson. 27-year-old Zyama Johnson, a former postal worker from New Jersey, applied for a job with the Hudson County Sheriff's Office in the fall of 2022. She wanted to work as a security guard for the law enforcement agency. It was an arguably uninspired choice of employment given that Johnson was a fugitive from justice at the time. She was wanted in Monroe County, Pennsylvania for failure to appear in court on charges of fraud. The woman had 10 additional bench warrants for failure to appear in court on traffic charges in Jersey City. Johnson's intent was presumably to hide in plain sight by working for the police, but she failed to realize that they'd perform a background check that would reveal her status. Johnson was called into the sheriff's office under the guise that she was going to sit down for an interview. When she showed up, deputies arrested her. A routine inventory of her belongings would reveal that she was in possession of 2 stolen credit cards. Consequently, on top of her previous charges, Johnson was charged with credit card theft. The police also contacted her former employers, which prompted the United States Postal Investigation Service to launch an inquiry of its own to determine if Johnson had been involved in criminal activity while working for the USPS. Number 10. Heather Sadd. In September of 2012, Heather Sadd was in the process of paying for a room at the Courtyard Marriott in Boynton Beach, Florida. When her credit card was denied, the woman demanded all the money in the register, telling the reception worker that she had a gun in her purse. Sadd fled the scene empty-handed when another clerk called 911. Even though she'd just tried to commit armed robbery, Sadd didn't go far. In fact, law enforcement found her lounging by the pool at a nearby housing development later in the day. She was taken to Palm Beach County Jail on a charge of attempted armed robbery. As reported by local law enforcement, Sadd also had an outstanding warrant on a grand theft charge at the time. Number 9. Brad. In early December of 2022, the Osceola County Sheriff's Office posted about a recent arrest on social media, cautioning the reader, "Seriously? We just can't make this up." The department uploaded the photo of a man who was only identified as Brad in handcuffs and with his pockets turned inside out. He'd gone into a St. Cloud Walmart where local police was taking part in a Shop with a Cop event for community children. The store was at the time teeming with law enforcement, including around 40 deputies, a forensics team, a community service team, and Sheriff Marcos Lopez. Brad then tried to shoplift unspecified items from the store, but given the circumstances, was promptly apprehended. In his possession, officers found bolt cutters, gloves, and a syringe before they took him away for processing. Remarking upon his poor decision-making, the department wrote in its post, "Bad news, Brad." Number 8. Ashley Stewart. Police in Streetsboro, Ohio, were alerted to a driver speeding on Highway I-480 and driving eastbound in the westbound lanes on October the 13th of 2012. Responding officers located a vehicle, a 2007 black Lincoln, about half a mile into Hudson. The driver, subsequently identified as 24-year-old Ashley Stewart, ignored the siren and emergency lights. She continued driving on the wrong side of the road and engaged the police in a chase during which speeds of up to 80 miles per hour were reached. As captured by law enforcement's dash cam, Stewart swerved all over the highway and at one point went off-road and almost struck a guardrail. She also narrowly avoided colliding head-on with several vehicles. The pursuit ended on State Route 14 near Mondial Parkway when a police unit pulled in front of Stewart's vehicle. She tried to turn and head the other way, but officers pursued her on foot, ordering her to exit the vehicle with her hands behind her back. The woman was reportedly crying when law enforcement approached her. Hudson police officers and a Summit County deputy had also taken part in the high-speed chase and were present at the scene. As Streetsboro police was removing Stewart from her Lincoln, the vehicle rolled back into the deputy's car and caused minor damage. Fortunately, no injuries were reported. Stewart refused to submit to a breathalyzer and was arrested on charges of operating a vehicle while impaired and failure to comply with the signal of a police officer, a third-degree felony. Stewart's booking photo, which showed her teary-eyed with mascara running down her face, earned a considerable attention online in the incident's aftermath. The cumulative bad decisions from getting behind the wheel while intoxicated to engaging the police in a chase resulted in Stewart facing a maximum of 3 years behind bars. She eventually pleaded guilty to failure to comply and was sentenced to 100 days in Portage County Jail as well as 5 years of probation. Number 7. Rallick Hansen. A crew of robbers broke into a crowded Cartier store in Midtown New York City on January the 30th of 2014. The 5 men used hammers to smash display cases and fled with 16 watches totaling over $700,000. Several suspects were subsequently taken into custody. Roberto Grant and Alan Williams, both in their 30s, were stopped in the getaway car. They were wearing the same outfits as shown by the store's surveillance footage. Additionally, each had one of the stolen watches on their wrist. In April, the authorities indicted 28-year-old Rallick Hansen in connection to the heist, but he remained at large, with law enforcement labeling him armed and dangerous. Hansen faced a lengthy prison sentence as he and his crew were believed to have also orchestrated heists in Atlantic City and Virginia. On Halloween 2014, a FedEx man delivering a package rang several bells at 360 Snedeker Avenue in Brownsville, Brooklyn. One of the apartments that he'd contacted was Hansen's. As later reported by the FBI, Hansen mistakenly thought that the police had found him. He grabbed his loaded .357 caliber pistol and tried to hide under his couch. While the man was squeezing his body beneath the piece of furniture, the gun discharged. Hansen's haste, sparked and fueled by paranoia, had led to him accidentally shooting himself in the head. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Number 6. Jacques Freitas. On December the 22nd of 2022, a Brazilian civil servant went on a CCTV-recorded rampage at a luxury condominium in Salvador. The man, whom local authorities named as Jacques Freitas, broke into the complex by hurling himself headfirst into a metal barrier. In the moments that followed, he used his head as a battering ram once more and dove through a glass pane. The shirtless and shoeless Freitas ended up on the floor of a condo where a British woman had been living for a year. In spite of deep cuts and other injuries, Freitas rose to his feet and approached the expat as she was standing by a Christmas tree. She fought off Freitas, who'd removed his shorts with the apparent intention of forcing himself on her. In the final piece of surveillance footage, the woman was seen run into the outdoor swimming pool. Even though he was limping and shaken because of his wounds, Freitas chased after the victim. However, when he reached the edge of the pool, he collapsed from blood loss. Local media reported that he died at the scene. Building manager Rita Perez commented on the attack, telling the media it was a night of terror. I've never seen anything like it. She claimed that the trail of blood that Freitas had left in the condo looked like someone had killed an ox. Perez also noted that the expat, while physically unharmed, was in shock in the aftermath and remained awake throughout the night. Local authorities suspected that drugs had been a factor in Freitas' rampage, as pills, hallucinogenic mushrooms, and cannabis were reportedly found at his flat. Number 5. Derek Mosley. On July the 25th of 2013, a man tried to rob a gun store in Portland, Oregon, but was critically outmatched in terms of weaponry. 22-year-old Derek Mosley literally brought a knife to a gunfight when his targeted discount guns at 8118 Southwest Beaverton Hillsdale Highway. Aside from the 9-inch blade, Mosley was also armed with a baseball bat. He rushed into the store, smashed the display case, and removed a semi-automatic pistol. Unfortunately, much like one would expect from a weapon on display, it was unloaded. The store manager brandished his own handgun and ordered Mosley to drop the knife, bat, and the purloined pistol. The manager then called 911 and ordered the perpetrator to remain on the floor until Washington County deputies arrived at the scene. Mosley was arrested for robbery, theft, unlawful possession of a firearm, and criminal mischief. On February the 28th of 2014, he pleaded guilty to 1 count each of second-degree theft and second-degree criminal mischief. He was sentenced to 5 years of probation, which included mental health treatment, in order to have no contact with the victim. Number 4. Jeffrey Tyler Siegel. In the spring of 2013, Jeffrey Tyler Siegel took Brianna Coots on a first date through Crowley's Ridge Nature Center in Jonesboro, Arkansas. While they were returning from the Lookout Pavilion, a man clad in all black came out of the woods and threatened them with a knife. He reportedly told Siegel, "You can go, but your girlfriend stays." Coots ran away and went over a cliff, but she wasn't seriously injured and was able to call 911. Siegel later encountered how he was slashed twice on the chest and wrist while fighting with the masked attacker. The latter reportedly ran away after Siegel had clinched and kneed him in the midsection. When first responders arrived at the scene, they noticed that 26-year-old Siegel's cuts were very shallow. Law enforcement, aided by K9 units, combed the woods for hours, but found no trace of the assailant. Detective Mike Branscombe subsequently interviewed Coots, who claimed that she'd felt something was wrong during the date and that she'd seen Siegel texting right before the attack. Branscombe called Siegel in for an interview, but he seemed reluctant and repeatedly asked why the police wanted to talk to him. He showed up to the station and repeated the version of events that depicted him as a hero who'd risked his life to protect his date. The detective could tell, however, from Siegel's body language that he was withholding information. The man eventually became verbally unresponsive and shut down. After Branscombe told him that no charges would be filed if he told the truth, Siegel revealed that the attack had been a fabrication. He told the detective that he really liked Coots and thought that staging an attack would impress her and increase his chances of having a relationship with her. His superficial wounds had been self-inflicted. Siegel admitted that it just really got out of hand very fast. No charges were filed, but the man's actions were met with anger by Coots, who thought the attack was real and who could have broken bones when she fell from the cliff. Number 3. Thomas Hartman. 25-year-old Thomas Hartman was in the interrogation room at the Omaha Police Department in October of 2017. He accused his brother of stealing $445 in cash and a cell phone from him. A detective urged Hartman to come clean, indicating that the police had visuals of his brother at the time of the alleged robbery, and he was confirmed to have been on the other side of town. They were in the process of charging Hartman with false reporting, while his teenage girlfriend was in the adjacent interrogation room. At some point, Hartman realized that he was going to be arrested. Surveillance footage would show him yelling at his girlfriend through the wall, saying, "Get that money and bail me out." After about 90 minutes, when he was alone in the room, Hartman placed a chair on the table, climbed on top of it, and reached into the ceiling tiles. Officers caught him in the act and initially believed he was trying to escape. One of them inspected the ceiling tile, and a small bag containing a white substance fell to the floor. But the officer initially missed it. When a technician came to straighten up the room, she found the bag on the floor, and tests revealed that the substance inside was crack cocaine. It then became clear that Hartman had tried to hide drugs in the ceiling of the video-monitored police interrogation room. He was eventually convicted of possession of a controlled substance and sentenced to 9 months of supervised release. Number 2. Teng and Pai. In 2017, a Chinese man who was only identified as 22-year-old Teng tried to impress a woman he'd recently met at a bar by racing her in a rented Lamborghini Gallardo. While attempting to overtake her, Teng lost control of the green supercar, veered across the highway, and crashed into a tree. He wasn't reported to have sustained serious injuries, but the Gallardo was left with considerable damage to its front, which was suspended in the air. The woman that Teng had tried to impress, who was named as Pai, recorded the aftermath of the wreck. She mocked the man as he was pacing around the disabled Gallardo, telling him, "Trying to race me, amateur." The footage showed a frustrated Teng kicking a piece that had come off the car. He was arrested and charged with drunk driving, meaning that his insurance wouldn't cover the damage he'd caused the supercar, which amounted to more than $13,000. Pai's decision to record him and later upload the videos would backfire on her. The footage helped local police track her down, and she was arrested for driving without a license. Number 1. MacArthur Wheeler and Clifton Earl Johnson. 2 bank robberies, one in Swiss Vale and another in Brighton Heights in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, were carried out on January the 6th of 1995. The robbers, MacArthur Wheeler and Clifton Earl Johnson, first targeted a melon bank in the afternoon. As one of them stood in line, the other struck a teller with a handgun and demanded cash. The duo fled the scene with $5,200 before robbing a Fidelity Savings Bank in suburban Pittsburgh. Johnson was arrested within a week, and Wheeler was taken into custody in April. Law enforcement had received tips after releasing a surveillance photograph of Wheeler as part of a Pittsburgh Crime Stoppers segment with the Evening News on the 19th of the month. Wheeler was arrested the following day. Johnson struck a deal with the authorities and pleaded guilty to the Mellon Bank heist, in addition to a couple of unrelated robberies that he'd carried out the previous year. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison and agreed to testify against Wheeler. The latter was handed a sentence of more than 24 years in prison for the Swiss Vale robbery. One peculiar aspect of the robberies was that neither man had made any conventional attempt to conceal their identities. Instead, it would emerge that they'd applied lemon juice to their faces. It was suspected that the move was based on the fact that it was used as an ingredient in invisible ink. Wheeler claimed that Johnson had assured him that rubbing lemon juice on their faces would make them invisible to the surveillance cameras, which it wouldn't and didn't. Wheeler was rightfully skeptical and had tested out the method. He covered his face in lemon juice and then took a Polaroid selfie. He was missing from the photo and concluded that it worked, even though any number of reasons could have factored into his absence from the image, from bad film to him pointing the camera in the wrong direction. Detectives reported that Wheeler was shocked when confronted with his incriminating surveillance photo, telling them, "But I wore the lemon juice. I wore the lemon juice." The incident inspired a study carried out by David Dunning, a social psychology professor at Cornell University, and his graduate student, Justin Kruger. Dunning operated from the premise that Wheeler's stupidity protected him from an awareness of his own stupidity and aimed to measure one's perceived competence against their actual competence. He and Kruger co-authored the paper, Unskilled and Unaware of It: How Difficulties in Recognizing One's Own Incompetence Lead to Inflated Self-Assessments, in 1999. The Dunning-Kruger Effect would henceforth be known as cognitive bias, in which people of low ability or knowledge in a field overestimate their ability to perform in it. Thanks for watching. If you could go back and change one thing in your past, what would it be? Let us know in the comments section below.